Welcome back to Middle-earth Theater. Once again, we'll be discussing J.R.R. Tolkien and his epic fantasy, The Lord of the Rings, and trying to examine it to find what sort of meaning, and given that we know that Tolkien was a Christian, what exactly type of Christian meaning we can find in it. Just a note, I don't have the PowerPoint on display. You can just follow through on the slides. I'll note where we change pages. But let's get into it. Lord of the Rings, what's it all about? Slide 1. Christians and non-Christians alike have seen the movies, read the books, and there's a lot of elements in it. Some you find in many adventures, some are unique, but it's kind of a bit of a challenge to see where exactly the gospel and his Christian faith came through. So, slide 2, you look at, there's courage, there's good versus evil. Tolkien does introduce the humble race of the hobbits, which might give a clue to the sort of meaning he has in mind here. There's friendship and fellowship throughout the struggles. Middle-earth is a special place, but at the end of the day, you say, what makes this different than, say, Braveheart, where there's good and evil there. There's courageous characters on display. So, well, Tolkien gives us the answer to that question, actually, in a letter in 1958. Go to the third slide. He says, he noted, well, it's mainly concerned with death and immortality. So I will propose that we can understand Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings as an extension of Tolkien's Christian faith and see how it expresses it by examining how the different characters view and present their cases for immortality and view their own mortality. But Tolkien's key theme of death is you actually get a little bit better appreciation for it when you look at how he put together a story. So just like a brief aside here, because it really enriches the how the whole story works. In contrast to his friend C.S. Lewis, another Christian fantasy writer, fellow professor of literature at Oxford, Lewis had a very allegorical approach, strong symbolism. Aslan in Narnia was Christ in our world. Tolkien was critical of that, and he said, the way Tolkien constructed a story, fantasy story, said he really had 3 elements. He said, first you create a world that's full of, magic and beauty and awe. But second, you introduce an evil. I mean, every plot's got good versus evil in it. But Tolkien extrapolated. He said, ultimately, the ultimate story is the escape from death. That should be one of the central themes of a good fantasy story. But finally, in contrast to a tragedy where you have a tragic ending, where some evil has worked its way through the characters and plot in a fantasy, you have a happy ending. He called a eucatastrophe, a good catastrophe, victory snatched from the jaws of defeat. So the centrality of death and the battle against it really is what Tolkien thought made for a gripping story. So the 3 key insights that Tolkien presents his Christian faith through are what I would call to live humbly, to live sacrificially, and to live hopefully. Those are the 3 ways in which we can see Tolkien's Christian faith work through, and it's presented in various of the characters. Look at live humbly. I mean, just as an overview of the overall theme, the lesson most people get. Frodo, he's the humble hobbit, and somehow he does battle against the evil One Ring of power, the One Ring, and Mount Doom and Sauron. I mean, the One Ring itself, one ring to rule them all. That is the opposite of humble. It's trying to have everybody serve you. The One Ring doesn't serve everyone. No, that's not humble. But when you look a little more in depth at some of the characters and some of the bylines in the story, I just want to look at the ruling family of Gondor, who's taking the place of the king of Gondor while he's on vacation, as they interpret it. So Denethor, the ruling king, but near the end of his life, Gandalf asked him, well, things didn't turn out how you liked. How would you like for them to have turned out? He said, well, I would have liked to turn the throne over to my son, who would be his own master and no wizard's pupil. He wanted self-control. He did not want to recognize a wisdom greater than his own. Boromir similarly is described, not in humble terms. He's described as proud and fearless, ever anxious for victory and his own glory. But you contrast that with Faramir, who Frodo describes as a man less self-regarding. And he did recognize a wisdom greater than outside of himself. Said he's wise and learned in the scrolls of many ancient things, lore and song and whatnot. So living humbly is one message that Tolkien's characters show us. Secondly, they live sacrificially. Gandalf is probably the premier example of this. He stands there and says, "None shall pass," and then he gives his life for his friends, just like Christ says, greater love has no man. He gives his life for his friends. So, Frodo similarly lives sacrificially. I mean, he bears the weight of the ring as he carries it to make the sacrifice. And people describe him as kind of a Christ the priest figure, because he's the one that actually destroys sin and death, as it were. But he's also like Christ in that he bears in his own body the burden of it. Dante is also, flipping back slightly, is also described in Christ-like terms as he descends with the Balrog. He lies in a pool of water at the bottom, which is very similar to how Dante described death, because it's in the lower reaches of hell. You're far from God's warmth and love and his light, and that's where Gandalf goes, into the dark and cold of death. Before he's resurrected, comes back as Gandalf the White, much like Christ is resurrected. Finally, the characters show how you can live hopefully. Theoden, the king of Rohan, is kind of hinted at it. You don't totally get that from how it comes out in the movie, but as a minstrel sings at his eulogy, sings how he rekindles hope, and he ends his life in hope over death and into glory. But it's in Aragorn where we see this most explicitly, as he describes to Arwen at the end of his life. He says, "In sorrow we must go, but not in despair. We are not forever bound to the circles of this world. There's more than memory there, waiting for him." He has hope for that. When he's born, he's given when he's adopted by the elves at age 2, he's given the name Estel, which translates in Elvish to hope. He's also described as a healer, just the same way that Christ brought healing and hope to the world. Aragorn does that. So Aragorn is really a very strong Christ-like figure. He's maybe not entirely Aslan, but he's has some very strong elements of hope. So these are 3 ways in which we can look at the Lord of the Rings and its themes and understand how Tolkien's Christian faith shows itself. The characters live humbly. They admit a wisdom outside of themselves, greater than themselves. They live sacrificially. Life is actually renewed and secured by the sacrifices of the few or of one. Finally, they live hopefully in the same way that Christ gives us hope. Thank you.